The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
You're in violation of secure communication procedures, Commodore.
So we just went ahead and fixed the glitch.
There is no America. There is no democracy.
Our fifth objective, a new world order.
There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West.
Right-wing conspiracy.
What do you call it when the assassins accuse the assassin?
A new world order.
Thank you for plugging in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
Well, just a second there, Professor. We fixed the glitch.
I'm your host, Professor Thomas Henry Horan.
He reads everything.
Hello there, my beautiful, bodacious, bountiful boosters. You better bet your bippies he reads everything, and I'm going to read you some of it right now. But first, how would you like to be the Iranian intelligence official responsible for predicting Donald Trump's next move? What will that silly son of a gun do next? You're closing the Straits of Hormuz? No, you are not closing the Straits of Hormuz. We are closing the Straits of Hormuz. Unpredictability. It is a weapon and a tool. Let's get back to what we were talking about. You don't need to see this. Good. Now, you'll see this. You will see this. We were talking about the Templars. Or I was talking about the Templars. I don't know what the hell you people were talking about. You could be talking. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no way of knowing what you're talking about. By the way, if you ever want to tip me, all tip money will go to the purchase of this. Why can't I open this up? What I want is one of these. This is a double denarius from the 280s of Rome. This coin is the reason we're all speaking Christian today. This is the greatest coin ever minted. Yeah, see, the $20 plus about $10 shipping and handling. $30 to $40 including shipping and handling. That's all these are worth. $35 include shipping and handling. They're worthless. This is the greatest. You know, I collect counterfeit coins, right? Like this one. Like this. There is a coin that is worth less than this, and it is the double denarius, which would supposed to be the equivalent of about a 200. Look at these. Some people want to charge like $188. Do not fall for, I will not spend more than $40. And do not fall for the ones that look like they're silver. They have no silver. This, if there's a coin that was worth less than this is a penny from, it doesn't matter. You know the type. The copper scratches off of the pot metal. There's no light. Oh, for God's sake. Hold on. 2010. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. These confetti. There's a coin worth less than that. And this was supposed to be a $200 bill. That's what I want for my birthday. I want one of these coins. I'll explain when I get it. You don't have to tip. All tip money will go towards the purchase of one of these. And I will not spend more than $40. I will not spend more than $40. And this coin is why we're all speaking Christian today. Okay? Now, enough. It's all about the money. Here's the thing. It's all about the money. So going back to the Templars, they don't come from nowhere, as you will see. They don't disappear to nowhere, as you will see. As we all know, the survivors all fled to Scotland and Brittany. We all know this. It's all about the money. It goes back to Constantine and the original Byzantine establishment, who were friendly at first. It goes back to Shia Christians. It goes back to 6000 BC. So, speaking of Robert the Bruce, Something you have to understand about Scottish history. There's nothing Scottish. Robert the Bruce did not have 1 inch of Scottish guts in his haggis. He did not have one Scottish bone in his body. Robert de Bruce was a Plantagenet. This is very important. William the Plantagenet, they're like Agamemnon. They get the train back on the tracks. William the Conqueror manages to unite the economically viable parts of England. He gets the train back on the tracks. He takes the census, the Doomsday Book, all those other things. The S is pronounced Doomsday. 2 O's is not pronounced ooh, it's pronounced dough. And it is the Domesday Book. But it's not dome like... Okay. Here's my point. It's all about the money. The Templars versus the Inquisition is all about the money. And it's all about, well, for example, the Templars were accused, and apparently this is the most consistent accusation against them, and confession they supposedly made, was that they denied the cross, to the point of trampling and spitting on the cross. They denied the cross. Well, going back to Paul, going back to Philo of Alexandria, going back to the oligarch, going back to all of the money, that would be because the debt to the temple had not been remitted after all. The sign of the cross went in your account book, your debt ledger. When a debt had been remitted, when the payments were taken over by someone else, now they hold the lien. When that happened, they marked it with a cross and they put the name of their remitter or the redeemer. And with a page, with a reference, cross-reference to where that account was debited. They didn't keep the debits and the credits on one page. They kept debits and credits on 2 different pages. Other than that, it was double entry accounting. Actually, it was more subtle. It's very difficult to audit. What double entry accounting does is make audits easy, and that stabilizes the money. The ledger system was the way to hide from the auditor, but you could still find all the money. So the Templars, you have to understand the old syndicate didn't really go away, but they were really confined to a few seaports, and they really kind of have to hunker down for a few hundred years and slowly grow back. The Templars are the rest of Europe, northern central Europe, up into England and Scotland. Are you with me? You have the basically the Judeo-Italo mafia still in the Mediterranean, particularly around Italy. They're still there. The Templars take over like everything away from the seacoast. They take over inland. And they begin to compete. Like, you'll have this network of monasteries and church farms and things, and in between, literally in between, you get Templar establishments. You get these estates donated by these kings to the Order of the Temple. And they are plugged into the eastern banks. So territorially, there's a separation there. And culturally, but they're plugged into the same, they're kind of competitors, they're kind of not. They're kind of allies. And when Philip the Fair, you notice they're always named ironically. When Philip the Fair seizes the company, it's because they're not paying any taxes. They're tax exempt. They're keeping all the money. So when they go underground, one of the things one of the persistent rumors was they denied the cross. This would be their claim. This goes back to Paul, saying that the temple is no longer in one physical location. It's back to the original Judaism. The temple is in all the high places, okay? But this is a modern, a modern first century view of the traditional religion. It is everywhere the church is, legally. So that's why Jesus has to be king of the Jews. So then he has the legal authority to remit the sin tax debt as king of the Jews. Legally. This is a legal hair that's split by Paul. But then he has to turn around and say, there is no kingdom. You notice, right? Jesus tells, my kingdom is not of this earth, whatever. Paul pushes this because that would mean that Herod or whoever would still be king. No, they don't want that. They want what we today would call the church, what he called the ecclesia, but the institution, the old age pension homes and the banks that they're running. He wants that to have the authority of the temple state, the state temple, priesthood in Jerusalem, but not be physically confined to Jerusalem or any physical building. Are you with me? It's a new kind of financial institution. It is. It is a new kind of financial institution. And he bases this legal authority on Jesus's crucifixion on the cross. That's the symbol of redemption and remission, but it's also, he pays the blood and remits the sin, so now he is the holder of the sin debt. And the Corpus Christi, which Paul legally explains using Aristotle's body politic as his model. He explains how the Corpus Christi, the community of these Christian organizations, is the body politic, but it's spread, it's transnational. It's in a different dimension, not a higher, but it's transnational. And it legally performs the function of the temple bank. So the church in Europe eventually wins this legal status, more or less. They never perfectly pull this off. Something always happens. There's always a Frank around the corner. There's always a Goth. There was a Goth in the Chrism. There's always a Gothic flea in the Chrism. Fucking things up for everybody. But are you with me? The Templars will say, no, you are not the legitimate bank. Because Jesus didn't die on the cross. This is the Muslim belief. It's no coincidence they believe this. And they didn't just pick it up from the Muslims. This is what the Shia Christians believe, basically. Who take over, kind of by accident, after the plague of Justinian. That's a different story. It is all about the money. But the Templars compete against Rome because Rome claims this status as Paul's Corpus Christi bank, whereas the Templars say, no, the temple is still there, but the temple is where the blood of Christ is, and that's why they have their Holy Grail legend. That they don't claim, right? It's a rumor they put out there. They claim a rumor claims they believe this. And so when they deny the cross, they're denying the Catholic Church's power to collect that tithe, which has become a tax, which is what the Sadducees had done in the Holy Land. The Korban is no longer a voluntary donation. The Korban is now a tax. And some families have to choose between paying the tax or feeding their elderly parents and things. So that's why it's so important for Jesus to pick those particular cases as a lawyer. He's saying the law of Moses trumps your newfangled Deuteronomy and even Leviticus. He's making that case. For Roman authorities to say, okay, this is the actual Jewish law and this other Jewish thing, which everybody knew had been invented by the Ptolemies, right, so they could claim Jewish status. We will get to that. Back to the Templars and Robert the Bruce and King James. Here's where it becomes important. The Bruces intermarry. Well, Robert the Bruce he's a Plantagenet. He's a homicidal maniac. But he unites Scotland into a unified kingdom. Then James, who's descended from Henry VIII, or Henry Tudor, he's a descendant from both sides. He becomes the king of Scotland, and now, being Elizabeth dies childless, there's a unified kingdom of England and Scotland. There's a unified crown. Anyway, we have one king over both kingdoms, which have been unified by the Plantagenets, who were Normans. Who were the Normans? when Constantine brings his Christian bean counters to Byzantium, the new broom sweeps clean. All the old Byzantine, all the old Hellenized Jewish or not Hellenized Jewish administrators, their friends, that whole establishment, poof, they are out. Except for the ones who cross their fingers and join. They become the Shia Christians. They are crypto Jews. They are Shia Christians who become Shia Muslims. They will also deny the cross for the exact same reason. We will come back to this. The reason Muslims deny the cross is for the exact same reason. They deny the Catholic Church's status as the God-appointed universal Corpus Christi transnational bank. That's exactly why they do or do not deny the cross. It has everything to do, but the Catholic Church has never officially operated as a bank. Just how far back does propaganda do go? We don't know. But I'm going to... You will see. The Great Schism is about this. Then there's the Avignon Schism. It's all about the money. It's all about who... Okay, so the Korban has become a compulsory tax. Now the Catholic Church, its Roman partners, the tithe has become a tax. It's an obligatory tithe. The Templars don't pay this or any other taxes. Goody gumdrops for the Templars. But if the church in Rome is no longer the vicar of Jesus' banker, then that's what the Templars claim to be, but they got to deny the cross. Because that denies the remission of the debt. And that's why they come up with their own legend of Joseph of Arimathea embezzling some of the grace. He embezzles some of Christ's blood. The sacrifice is incomplete. The debt is still owed to the temple, which is now held by the Templars, because they have what's left of the blood. And they dug up all the cinnabar or whatever. That's why they put out so much misinformation, so much misinfo prop about themselves, it starts to ring bells. This is like the JFK assassination. This myth of the Inquisition, overblown myth of the Inquisition. It reminds me of the completely fake assassination attempt on the life of Charles de Gaulle in 1962. And the totally fake moon landing staged, it wasn't photographed, it was all hush-hush, and it was very hurried. The totally fake execution of Colonel Bastien Thierry, who was a close personal friend of de Gaulle. His family were close personal friends of de Gaulle. The de Gaulles and the Thierrys had been going to the military academy together for 1,000 years, I think, right? They knew they were friends. It was totally fake. But the movie Day of the Jackal is a really good movie. You should watch that. And that reminds me, you got to watch this movie. There's a movie called The In-Laws, starring Alan Arkin and Peter Falk. It is the original Rick and Morty. I don't want to give you too many spoilers. Peter Falk plays a guy who claims to be a CIA agent, and his kid is marrying Alan Arkin's kid, who's just a dentist. He's just a nice Jewish dentist. And he says, Shelly, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to go around the corner. They're downtown Manhattan. He has his dental office. Come around the corner. Once you go up, my competition sees me. I want you to go up, get a package, bring it back downstairs. And this becomes this around-the-world adventure, crazy Latin dictators, everything you can think of. It's the original Rick and Morty. It's called The In-Laws, and it's really good. They make the perfect pairing for this story. Alan Arkin is Morty and Peter Falk is Rick. It is hilarious. It is one of the 10 funniest movies ever made. And it's kind of like that. Have you seen War Dogs? I've never seen War Dogs. What's War Dogs about? We'll talk about War Dogs later. I need to watch War Dogs. I wasn't into it that deep, but... Okay, East-West Schism. And of course, Philip the Fair had illegally borrowed, was it? He's borrowing from the Templars. See, Christians aren't supposed to charge other Christians interest. Jews aren't supposed to charge each other interest either. See, I think one problem was Philip had illegally borrowed a lot of money from the Templars. Yeah, see, they did the whole... They literally did this. On the books, these were interest-free loans, but then there were all sorts of gifts that Philip would grant the Templars. I forgot. This is how they charged interest on loans. They couldn't charge interest on loans, but they could accept gifts. And that's how, and all this money is going to them. See, you got to understand the Visigothic Revolution. Here's what the Visigoths did. All this money is being siphoned all the way to Byzantium. It's not even going to Rome anymore. It's going to Byzantium. The Western European tax base is all being siphoned off towards Byzantium. So the Visigoths get rid of that. They cancel that. They more or less keep the bishoprics where they are. They do kind of like a Henry VIII. But all tax revenues will stay in each individual kingdom, right? They break it up into individual kingdoms on purpose. They think empires just drain money away from most of the empire towards one central capital city. They overthrow this system. There are certain theological arguments they make to make it legal, to convince the judges, to convince the prelates. This is legal, this is law. And they do it. But the problem is they throw out a lot of the bathwater when they throw out the baby. That's one big problem. The Muslims, the Arabs bring that back, and then they say, oh, wait, let's put their two systems together. Let's put the peanut butter and the chocolate together, and they create Islam, which then echoes and rebounds back east. But it never, it's too, the Eastern Caliphate, the original Caliphate, is caught between Europe and China, whereas the North African Spanish Caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate, they're just free. They're free as a bird. They built paradise. They built a very modern. Caliphate Spain was very close to 20th century. I mean, it was very close. So, that's what you're going to be seeing soon. It's all about the money. It's all about the money. It's all about the money. So the Templars have supposedly collected all this treasure. What nobody knows is they've already fenced it all in the East. Besides, the Templars have learned the secret. They have learned the secret of the syndicate. This is where they beat the Catholics in Rome, but they compete very effectively against the Jewish banking houses, the seaside dons, okay, these Judeo-Italo-Mafia banks, not just banks, there's the Perucci. Every grain of wheat, barley, or rice that changed hands in the Italian peninsula passed through the hands of the Perucci conglomerate. I'm not exaggerating. Finance, the big bank, the super bank for the super corporations was House of Bardi. You had the metal cartel, you had the grain cartel, you had the olive oil cartel, you had the wine cartel, you had the military contracting cartel. It was all done in contract. They charge interest directly, which is politically incorrect. Blah, blah, blah. Cash. Because they're not interested in owning kingdoms. If you own land, you own a popcorn fart. So the Templars acquire all the capital. And up until now, the Arab Empire has been strip mining Europe like a third world country. You understand this, right? And they're selling back a few wildly overpriced drugs and silks and whatnot to these motorcycle gang chiefs at exorbitant prices, and the money's all flowing east. Well, where did the Templars come from? They come from the Normans. Where did the Normans come from? Where did the Vikings get all this advanced knowledge? How did this happen? Oh, there's a documentary. They've proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that the Celts who interacted with the Etruscans did know a lot of Pythagorean mysticism. They were Druids. The Druids were Celtic Pythagorean mystics. They existed. Archaeologists have examined, there's this guy, I don't know if he used AI or what, he's a mathematician, and he examined all this Celtic jewelry. All those knots and things, those aren't just pretty. They didn't just learn to do that like crochet work. Those are very Pythagorean. He said he noticed it when he was in grad school and he just kept working on it. The Druids existed, but the Normans are not Druids. When Constantine muscled out the establishment in Byzantium, where did those people go? I'll give you a hint. They had already established for several centuries trading contacts with the Goths and Huns and all these people along, okay? They established the Kievan Rus. They bring Byzantine civilization to the barbarian tribes of the north, who already had an extensive trading network. Very busy trading network. The Vikings and the Normans don't come from Trojan refugees or Carthaginian refugees the long way around Spain necessarily, but they definitely, because Norman feudalism is word for word. It's just basically a translation into French for some reason instead of German. They translate the Byzantine and even early Constantine system into French, into Frankish language. They are the Byzantines. And they are apparently the Byzantine wing of the syndicate that were driven out by the Constantine party of so-called Christians. I will show you the syndicate begins over 12,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago. I will show you the step-by-step evolution of the syndicate. It is a real thing. I will show you what Hezekiah really did. You know, Hezekiah and Hezekiel are the same name, right? One is pronounced, because Ezekiel would be the Canaanite pronunciation. Speaking of golden calves. Speaking of the secrets of counterfeiting your own money. I will show you every step. I will show you every step. And really, the Templars are just sucking up all the money. They have to go. But there's no doubt they go underground and become the Freemasons because, right, you know more about James I than I do. So James I is famous for his demonology. James I is famous for bringing magic and the supernatural back into the Christian financial empire. And what this means is the Templars learned something from the Inquisition. They learned that fear of the Inquisition was more powerful than the Inquisition. Fear of the witch hunter in James's Britain was far more powerful than the witch hunter. They only had a couple of witch trials. But the fear it created. You could be accused of a crime that you could not prove you had not committed, and you could be tortured. The inquisitors, the new inquisitors, what were they called? The witch hunters. They're the ones who published the accounts of these trials and tortures. They wanted everyone to know. It's like the Gestapo. Very few Germans ever saw a Gestapo agent, whether they would have recognized one or not. It was fear of the Gestapo, where they derived all of their power. The less they did, the more powerful they were. Very selective and very careful about they created rumors about themselves. Like the CIA creating a conspiracy theory that they shot Kennedy. There is a pattern. There is a pattern. But what happens? But people believe their bullshit. They believe they have this pile of gold. They believe it has something to do with the blood of Christ. They think, well, it must be a bloodline. There was no gold, it must be a bloodline. No, it was all about the status of the bank. They were the true bank of the temple in Jerusalem, which had been transplanted by Joseph of Arimathea, who brought... Now, this bank was not open to audit. Here's the thing about one of Constantine's reforms was the state and even the church would not hold the national treasury, the official Roman treasury. That would be held in several private banks. Boethus, the richest man in the world, owned one of these banks. No. He was in Egypt. The families in Byzantium who were bought off they would hold, really didn't change anything. He just put a Christian label over it. They would hold the treasury, but it would be open to audit, and including elected representatives of the people. Once a year, there would be the audit. The team of auditors would see the vault and see everything in these private banks. That's one thing Constantine did, but he introduced a dual currency system. Gold would be used to pay taxes, official and government business. Silver and copper and salt would be used on the street. So you had inflation that just never went away. And in fact, you get the rich. The rich were getting richer simply by every second that ticked by on the clock. Inflation was making them richer by the minute because they were monetizing those deposits, as I have showed you. And I will show you in much greater detail later. Justinian... Now, this all operates without the tax revenues coming from the West. Justinian seizes the West, thinks all this tax money is going to come pouring in. But the Goths are telling the Arabs, and the Arabs are telling the Goths, and they put their heads together, and they come up with this new system. Okay? Which is all about, there's no crucifixion, and therefore the temple bank. But here's the thing, the Templars were very vague about where the transplanted bank was. They said that Joseph of Arimathea took the cup of blood to Avalon, which no one knows exactly where that is. Is it the entire island of Britain? There is an Apple Isle in the Channel. There's one on the way to Ireland. There's all kinds of Avalons. If you see the movie, it's very good. Watch the movie, not the Straw Man. Not Burning Man. What is that movie? Edward Woodward plays the cop looking for a lost child. Is it called Burning Man? Wicker Man. The movie Wicker Man from like 1973. Christopher Lee, Britt Eklund, right? One of the blonde bombshells. It's an excellent movie. Yeah. And watch The In-Laws. So, what I was going to finish my point about the Templars, and then ran out of hot air last time. It's all about the money. This claim to be the official God-sanctioned church temple bank is what this is all about. It's what it's all about. But in the Eastern Caliphate, they struggled too. They're caught between Europe and China. The irony is Byzantium and Constantinopolis they really energized the Silk Road. And it kind of swallows them. Remember, China would accept payment only in silver. They didn't even want gold. They just wanted silver. Which just drove up inflation, okay, under the Constantinian system. Yeah, and the Templars, the temple banking system also becomes a way of laundering money. Because the Templars can monetize your deposits. By the way, you are aware that FDR's reforms, the definition of mortgage was reversed. When you see these TV ads for reverse mortgages, no, those are mortgages. FDR reversed it. When you see that was the biggest wealth transfer in the history of the world, was between the New Deal and the GI Bill, was the biggest wealth transfer in the history of the world. When you hear people talk about deposits, you deposit your money in the bank, that's the exact opposite of a deposit. That's not what a deposit is at all. You are loaning money to the bank. The bank is giving you a promissory note that says they owe you your money you debited to your account. He reversed all of that. You're not depositing shit. A deposit is like if you take your gold bullion and you put it in the bank vault, not in your safe deposit box, you have deposited that gold bullion. It's on deposit. They're allowed to use it. They're allowed to monetize it. You are making, in your checking account, you're making a loan to the bank. They owe you that money. That's how the FDIC can get away with insuring it. They're actually insuring the bank. They are co-signing for the loan for the bank. You understand this, right? I was raised by lawyers and bankers. They taught me this as a child. You just change the terminology. That's why these people, these theologians, argue like lawyers over resurrection in the spirit versus resurrection in the flesh. I think the meaning of the story of Lazarus is he's resurrected in the flesh, therefore he still owes his eternal sin debt tax liability to Jesus now, and Jesus is the new temple, and so the Corpus Christi is the new bank. We are the new bank. This is for legal reasons. We still do this today. My point is, nothing has changed. There's not a lot of difference between an insurance company and a bank, really. It's the hairs that you split. When you pay premiums, let's say to a life insurance policy, they are monetizing that premium schedule. They're investing that money, and they're investing the cash that you give them. They have regulations on what they're supposed to invest that cash in and what they're supposed to monetize. There are regulations. There are supposed to be differences between retail mortgage banks and high-risk vulture capitalist investment banks. The Romans had the same laws, especially after the collapse of the temple. And I think Paul is actually a lobbyist, and he's buttering his organization's bread while he does it, just like today. I mean, exactly like today. An insurance fund and a bank fund are kind of the same thing. There are specific regulations today on how they're supposed to. There was insurance in Roman times. There was business insurance. There was shipping insurance, that kind of insurance. Life insurance was invented to insure the lives of Southern slaves because all that money was borrowed. It was all borrowed. When slaves bought their freedom from their masters, no, their masters were going to let them go free, but they had to pay off the lien at the bank. The bank had a lien on that person, basically. These legal loopholes they went through, the 7-year indentured servitude, it wasn't indentured, it was bondage, but still, all those loopholes they went to were all about the money. It was all about the money. It was all about the money, and it was all borrowed money. It was all borrowed money. Canceling slavery meant canceling the collateral on those loans, which meant that it was like Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was going to bankrupt the German insurance companies, and to make matters worse, all the glass was made in Belgium. The government was going to have to bail out the insurance companies to buy the glass from the Belgian, and that's why Hitler had to start the war, because they had to build their own. He had been secretly funding the rearmaments, the secret rearmaments program with MIFO bills, German greenback dollars. What was his name? Schacht? Hjalmar Schacht? The man who had Hitler's nuts in a vice? Hitler was not convicted and sentenced for one felony. Hitler had been convicted and sentenced 5 times for felonies ranging from attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. He gunned a guy down in another Brukeller brawl. He gunned a dude down. He did time for that. The only conviction he did not do time for was tax fraud. Massive tax fraud. Massive tax fraud. Hjalmar Schacht used that as blackmail for a long time. And then Hitler, he's the only one who survived. Hitler couldn't have him assassinated, but he had him moved out of his position. But the MIFO bills, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Nothing has changed. The Muslims make all money legal tender for debts, both public and private. They do not abolish the church. They do not confiscate its wealth like Henry VIII did. The Muslims simply cancel their tax exemption. Everyone pays 2.5%. You pay 2.5%, and you pay 2.5%, and you pay 2.5%, and you pay 2.5%. You don't pay the 2.5%, I come back and I cut your dick off. Are we clear? They try a restructuring, but regulations don't replace money. You can restructure the economy through regulation after the economy has imploded and there is a financial crisis. Justinian is not getting this fountain of tax revenue from the West that he had anticipated. Because for one thing, they didn't have the money. For another thing, he was kind of counting on chickens that had hatched before, like there was maybe some back taxes that hadn't, they were just sitting around in some bank vaults. He's like Columbus. He sells this bill of goods. And he's not replacing the private banks. He's not confiscating the gold in the private banks. He's not canceling their contracts. He's reactivating the old tax base from Western Europe, he thinks, with this army of hired Arabs. This turns into a real quagmire in the Italian peninsula. Destroys the economy. So he doesn't get the revenues. So his checks he's writing to his army start bouncing. And they're bouncing from Ireland to India. Literally. And the only reason I bring it up is it's the same old story. This is what happened to the Sumerian Empire, technically the Akkadian Empire. There was an administrator up the river, and his people were going hungry, and he had to feed his army and had to feed these workers, and his local state granary was empty, so he writes a check to one of the big regional reserve banks. They held on. They suppose this paper money was secured by grain and other commodities. Lapis lazuli, bitumen, a big bitumen. You have no idea how big their economy was. You have no idea how big the economy already was 4,000, 5,000 years, 6,000 years ago. We're beginning to realize there was a really booming economy. This economy was so big. The Sumerians were importing tin from Afghanistan and Cornwall simultaneously. They were exporting bronze on a 19th century scale. They were the Germany. They became like a Germany. They were the high-tech manufacturing center. They manufactured all these high-quality fabrics. They bought wool. They bought wool from the Judean highlands. They bought wool from the Himalayas and wove it into these cloths and sold them all over the world. They were amazing. Well, He writes his check. He wants to withdraw this grain to feed these people. And we don't have the canceled check, but we did find the central bank records where the check bounced, and that check bounced all the way to Ireland. Within 12 months, the Acadian Empire no longer existed. It was just gone because the paper money was completely worthless. And everybody, it took a few months for word to get up and down the Tigris and Euphrates road that Acadian paper money was now worthless. You don't understand. They were using that. They were collateralizing that in banks in places like Aleppo, the Phoenicians. There's no doubt. Well, before the Phoenicians, the Minoans. That check that guy wrote for grain, because all of a sudden it's like boom, boom, bada boom, bada bing. You know, there isn't any grain in any of the state granaries. It isn't just that they're out of grain. It's that the clay money is worthless. Not the street level currency, retail currency. The money. This isn't money. This is currency. You understand the difference, right? The $10 million bills, the $10 million treasury bonds, those are money. No taxes on tips. There were people who were counting on that money, and I don't mean people like you and me. Cicero calls them vultures, and he calls it the syndicate, he calls it the spider's web. He describes it in great detail. But they have a value. What they do is they go to places and they just set up if you've ever had like a big yard sale, a lot of families, you got one cash register, everybody's got a different colored tag in it, and the cashier writes down who's supposed to get the money, all goes in one box. End of the day, you divvy up the money. Maybe you tip the cashier. A hair salon, for Christ's sake, a beauty salon. Everybody's renting their own chair, but there's one receptionist, there's one cashier. That's how it was. You didn't have to trust Ahmed the camel dealer. Find a camel you wanted, to talk about a price, you go see the man. You go see, he was called the keeper of the scales. But there would be like an office. Not only negotiate a fair price, how much is that in copper, but he could say, you know, you got a good deal, man. He says he's got 3 camels he can let my brother-in-law have in Aleppo. All I got to do is wire in the money. You can establish a credit account. And you can, these merchants, it's paper money. It's paper money. If you lived in a major metropolitan, a real commercial banking center like Corinth or Ephesus or Antioch, Alexandria, you are getting updates in the company mail. Read Paul's letters. How were they distributed? They were distributed through the USPS of the day. He's traveling, if you believe a word of it. And there is a window of time between 70 and 73. Paul's travels supposedly he can fly all over in 3 years. He had previously spent a couple of years in Ephesus, and I think he was clerking. I think he worked for a company. He said his father was a tent maker, the fur and leather trade. That's what my family were in. He was a trained merchant, and he was a lawyer. So I think he represented the family company at all the big financial centers. He's meeting customers from all over the world without physically meeting them. An order will come in, 200 grade B plus goat skins at a price. He says, I'll take that. And the paperwork's done. The merchant in Baghdad doesn't have to be there. They already had this set up. But instead of paying for like an internet email, Visa card, Stripe, they were Stripe. They were the Bureau of Weights and Measures because they kept standard weights and measures. They were the notary office. They were a bank. They were an arbitration service. You sign terms of service. All disputes will be handled in not the company court. It was a service they provided. And maybe in a small town, there'd be one guy. Like, you remember Sam Drucker owns the general store and the bank and the post office? And he's justice of the peace? That goes back to the ancient world. There would be a publican or somebody or a syndicate representative who kind of did all those jobs, the keeper of the scales. In a bigger town like Capernaum, you'd have a small staff there. You might have 6 checkout lanes. Small retail transactions, I need 3 figs, cook supper tonight. You hand over a fistful of salt. That's a retail transaction. The credit transactions, and if you can't agree on a price, that's what the arbitrators are. They were called keepers of the scales. They were called mediators. It was commerce as a service. And they would pay for muscle. And they would say, you got to let us enforce our laws. And then they cut them in for a cut. Just like Stripe takes a cut. Just like YouTube takes a cut. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Literally. Read your banking agreement. They have to use a lot more words now for some reason, but the terms haven't changed. It makes the world go round. What was my point? My point, this is how Cicero described it. No, he wrote a conspiracy theory rant. There's a famous speech he gave. The Vatinius Clodius Circle, his scorching rhetoric, the Varian oration. They just call him a business. Describe him as a conspiracy. Conspiratio. Cicero calls them a conspiratio. In Julius Caesar, when Brutus turns to his wife, Calpurnia, he hears him coming up the steps of the manor house, and he says, "Oh, conspiratio, they are the faction." The invisible partners, the syndicate was made up of hidden partners, including senators who weren't legally allowed to trade, but used frontmen, the equities, the Jethros to run the business. The people who ran the steam bath were also the ones who sat on the juries. If you sued a member of the syndicate, you were essentially asking a wolf to judge a case against another wolf. They had their own private mail carriers, tabulare. They had their own security forces. They acted as a shadow government that was more efficient and more ruthless than the actual Roman governors. The republic was just a legal front. The syndicate was the actual power. The people were the collateral for the next loan. Future tax revenues. Do you have a copy in English? A famous translation, perhaps? It's everything. But he lobbied. Now, this is a guy who lobbied heavily for them. Cicero was maybe the most expensive lawyer in Rome of his day. He's a contemporary of Caesar. And he was probably, Clarence Darrow started off as the slickest corporate lawyer on Wall Street. Abraham Lincoln was the slickest. Let me tell you something about Abraham Lincoln. Every lawyer who faced him in a courtroom in Illinois complained that Abraham Lincoln could convince a jury that they were the ones who committed the crime or stole the money. They never talk about his time on Wall Street representing the Illinois Central Railroad, of which he was a member of the board of directors, and the senior vice president and chief engineer, of which was George Brenton McClellan. And another senior director was Stephen A. Douglas. You know Stephen A. Douglas only lost one election to Abraham Lincoln, and that was the presidency of the United States? Remember that time George Brent McClellan ran against Lincoln for president? Nothing has changed. It's the standard operating procedure. An opinion has now become established, pernicious to the Republic, which has been the common talk of everyone, that in the courts of law as they exist at present, no wealthy man, however guilty he may be, can possibly be convicted. This is from 2,000 years ago. And he talks about this man named Verres, this billionaire named Verres, who loots the province of Sicily. The money is funneled to the tax farming syndicates, the publicani. That same money is then used to bribe, but he calls them Michael Grant's translation. No, where he calls them a spider's web, etc. He goes around saying that people have reason to fear the consequences of filching enough for themselves only, but that he himself has carried off enough for a great many people, that no sanctuary is too holy for money to defile it. He's saying it's all about the economy of scale. He who has the gold makes the rules. Yeah, if you're poor, if you're middle class, you better watch out for the authorities. But if you have enough money, and that this guy is like bragging about it. Like he creates this caricature. You are hemmed in on all sides. All your plans are clearer than the day to us. Okay, never mind. But he comes up with this. He calls them wolves. He calls them a spider's web. He calls them the deep state. But he describes, they have their own mail system. They have their own. Yeah, he's absolutely right. That's what people pay for. He's describing Amazon. He is describing Amazon. He's describing Google. He's describing Meta. Who? I'm going to show you a map in a second. Isn't this thrilling? Can you believe you pay $10 a month for this? Yeah, his speech pro Flacco. Okay, the same Flacco. See, he defended Flacco at his trial. I think it's the same Flacco who was governor of Egypt for Sejanus, because that's right about the right time. Okay, so it's two different ones. Okay. Yeah. From pro Flacco. This is a different Flacco. He's defending a guy. You know how large a group it is, how they stick together, how influential they are in the informal assemblies. I will speak in a low voice so that only the judges may hear, for there are those who would incite them against me and every respectable man. This was true. This was true. When you watch Julius Caesar by Shakespeare, those guys who are saying, peace, ho, let's hear what he has to say, blah, blah, those are all paid. They are paid agitators. Just like the paid protesters and paid agitators you're watching on TV right now. And they had their assassins. I mean, he could be physically assaulted in the street. They were internationally connected. They sent gold to Jerusalem while Rome was in a crisis. See, everybody's looking for this gold that doesn't, nobody ever finds it. Nobody ever finds the gold because it doesn't exist. It's all on paper. Politically organized, able to show up in masses at trials to pressure judges. They were legally elusive. They used the web of their own customs to bypass Roman expectations. You know what he's talking about. Only one group had that exemption under Roman law. They operate in the dark. They operate through whispers. Their religious status, like Templars later, gave them a door to move money that the Roman state couldn't touch. You couldn't find it. And he's talking about all these Romans who were illegally doing business with them, looking for tax shelter, or Romans who were claiming Jewish status on their tax returns. Yeah, I told you about that, right? Pontius Pilate is Sejanus's man, and now Caligula's out to get him. We'll have to talk about that. We're going to have to talk about how Caligula used the bank at... See, nobody expected him to be emperor, so he's finding stuff out as a young man. And he wakes up from his illness. He probably was poisoned. He had reason to be paranoid anyway. Now he's really paranoid. Probably, he kind of sounds familiar. He kind of sounds like the guy who found out the whole system was rigged and he's telling everybody about it. Does that sound familiar? History books are about battles, but battles happen after the money collapses. That's the chaos after the money collapses. When the Assyrians reboot, the Babylonians reboot the Akkadian, but they start to adopt this Western innovation of using metals, gold, silver, and copper as reserves instead of grains, spices, and things like this. And what was his name? He pretty much puts a gun to Hezekiah's head and makes him institute the system. Right, we're going to talk about that. Where was Israel? Like, Israel was probably in Judah. It was never in Israel. But we'll talk about that later. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to about 12,000 BC and show you the end of the Ice Age and show you how there's a direct line of development here. A lot of relatively recent archaeological discoveries, for example. Yeah, we don't realize how big their economy was, and the only way it could have possibly operated is with paper money. See, you read a story, you read a historical account, you read a Bible story, and it says, so-and-so transferred 20 talents of gold and 100 talents of silver. He moved 100 talents of gold from Jerusalem to Tarsus. That's not what happened. What happened was, at the Jerusalem Bank, and probably backup copy at the Leontopolis Bank, so-and-so's account, there was a piece of paper in this file that said so-and-so had 20 tons of gold as security on something, okay? And then there's a file in laying top, or there's a file. He transfers this to a business associate in Tarsus. And all they do is they take the ledger page here and they debit the gold from this one and they credit it to this one. And there, gold has just now traveled 500 miles in 5 minutes. Gold could travel around the world in a day at these big banks. That is literally how they operated. There is no difference today. Our machines are slightly faster, but who sent it? What was it? Jeroboam sent 75 talents of gold to Hiram or something like that. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. It just moved from one column to another, and it never existed in any of those places. Someone knew there was some gold somewhere securitizing all of this. But every once in a while, there's an audit. Somebody breaks in and audits the books, and there's nothing there. When James this is in he talks about, now listen, what was it, wealthy? Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, is eaten by worms. Moths have eaten your gold and silver are corroded. He's talking about he has gone into the Holy of Holies, which is a bank vault. If you've ever been to a synagogue, the Holy of Holies is a bank vault. And he's saying that the gold bullion is just cheap brass. He's saying, I touched the menorah and my finger turned green. There's no money there. There's no money there. And he has seen the books. He says right here, the wages you withheld from the workmen who mowed your fields. He's talking about the temple owning these tax slaves who work for them, and they are shorting them on their pay. He has seen the books. Those wages are crying out against you. These aren't metaphors. He has seen the vault. He has seen the books. He's saying that the current phony Zadokite priests are running the temple corporation for their own private profit. That is what he's saying. Does that make sense? Probably not. So there was something I forgot to tell you the last time when I was talking about the Templars. Did I explain it? The Templars and the temple gold and what it really was and how it might have been because it's just a preview of what's to come. I will go back to 12,000 BC and I'll explain all of this. I'll give you a hint. It has everything to do with rectangular walls. It has everything to do with right angles and squares instead of circles. The rectangle, the square, I think, was from far off, a Nazi the Iceman could look down at a settlement and say, oh, that's a syndicate town. Or they could see one square building and they would know. That's a syndicate outpost. That's a syndicate location. I think the square was their logo. People could tell. And I will explain that really soon. I will show. Hi, Lord. I thought there was one more thing I was going to tell you. But that's why they split hairs over the nature of the resurrection. The nature. Was Jesus born a man? Was he born a Superman? Those things matter because of the money. It all matters because of the money. Because the only thing you can monetize is tax debt. That's the only thing a state can monetize. And it's all about the money. The Templars are all about the money. The Freemasons are all about the money. It's all about the money. What can I say? Oh, yeah. It's all about the money. I swear there's one more thing. They denied the cross. Oh, guess who had his head cut off? Right? They worship a disembodied head. Give me a second. Somebody was beheaded. James the Just was beheaded. John the Baptizer was beheaded. Because it was called, but we know that Baphomet is Muhammad. We know that. And we know that the Templars did business with the Muslims, who were way ahead of them on some of these economic reforms. It's all about accusing them of heresy that they can revoke their banking charter. They found in the Paris temple of the Templars, the Inquisition, that's why it's called a temple. So it can operate as a bank legally under Judeo-Christian laws that were the laws of the land. A silver gilt reliquary shaped like a woman's head, labeled Caput 58M. It reportedly contained the bones of a young woman. Some theorists suggest this was the head of wisdom or relic of Mary Magdalene. Any other beheaded bankers? Remember, Skull and Bones supposedly has the skull of Geronimo. Yeah, if it's supposed to be the head of Mary Magdalene, according to Templar lore, if that were the case, then these rumors about the bloodline descent. But I don't think that was really what they. I think it was more about the blood and its security for a bank. Like, why would they hold her head? Why would they hang on to the head? This has something to do with the money. Many early Christian traditions suggest that the Magdalene was the treasurer of the original apostles. But she wasn't beheaded. Zenobia of Palmyra seized Egypt and started minting her own coins, effectively repossessing the grain and gold supply from Rome. The Emperor Aurelian had to perform a massive military audit. He defeated her, paraded her in golden chains, and while some say she lived, many traditions hold she was executed, beheaded to ensure her private bank never reopened. More about Zenobia. These episodes are almost ready. Connected in 269, Zenobia sent her armies into Egypt. Who the fuck was Zenobia? See, this is right before the economic collapse of the 280s, where the money becomes completely worthless. In 269, Zenobia sent her armies into Egypt. She didn't just want the territory, she wanted the mint in Alexandria, which, again, she minted coins featuring the Emperor Aurelian on one side and her son, Vabalathus, on the other. And Zenobia was the door to the Silk Road. Why is anybody paying any attention to the Spice Road anymore? It's all Silk Road. Well, silk was making people rich. Her chief advisor and her chief financial officer and lead advisor, Cassius Longinus, was beheaded. Hmm. Uh, If it was the head of John the Baptist, that lean on salvation would trump Jesus's. There's a possible legal argument there, but I wonder if that's it. Okay. That's probably enough. There's probably too much of nothing. But this will give you an idea of where I'm going. But I'm going to start at 12,000 BC. There are some archaeological discoveries you must see. It's fascinating that might have been the head of a woman, because there's more and more archaeological evidence that there were an awful lot of women there were far more women than we realize who built trading empires, and this is going back to prehistory. You will see. You will see. This is why it's so fascinating. It's all about the money, and nothing has changed. You don't shut off the Strait of Hormuz. We shut off the Strait of Hormuz. I'm Professor Thomas Henry Horan, asking you to please stay plugged in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
He reads everything.
You better bet your bippy he reads everything. I'll see you in a couple of days.